now for the Big Hello. And my guest this week is originally from Sweetwater, Texas. Quick sidebar, when I was a kid and I'd have wrestling matches with my buddies on the front lawn, I always announced myself as being from Sweetwater, Texas. I don't know why. Just when I heard that name attached to Barry Windham, it sounded like the coolest place on earth. I have no idea if it is. I digress. This man is from Sweetwater, Texas. He broke into the wrestling business back in '92. He was trained by an Olympian, Brad Ringans. He started with the Global Wrestling Federation in Texas before making his way to Japan, Mexico, and eventually to Germany, working with Otto Wanz in the CWA. That led to an opportunity with the WWF back in '95, where he had a dark against Savio Vega. And the boss wasn't even around to see his match, but Gerald Brisco did, and he immediately told Vince McMahon they needed to sign this kid before he went to WCW. And the rest is history. Early in '96, he made his debut as a tough, rugged, raw-boned Texan with Dutch Mantel, a.k.a. Uncle Zebekiah, in his corner. And I took so much flack from my buddies back in the day because I kept saying, I don't know what it is, but this guy is special. They didn't see it. They didn't get it. I took the heat. Maybe I was just projecting my love for guys like Stan Hansen. But when he started tagging with the aforementioned Barry Windham, and then the legend Ron Simmons, I was convinced this guy had more to offer. The new Blackjacks may have been one of my favorites. They didn't make too big a dent on the scene, but the APA became a staple on WWE programming. I even submitted several skit concepts through WWE Canada for a Pulp Fiction-inspired series of vignettes that I was told would never work. The APA split for a while, and he went on for a bit of a singles run, messing around in the mid-card and picking up titles. And his character was similar to the one he entered the company with, except now he had all that steam from having built up through the APA. The APA did have a bit of a reunion, but then in 2004, he went on this solo run once again with a complete character makeover. It was at this time that I was able to call all my high school buddies and say, I was right. The new character is one of my all-time favorites. The recipe was complicated. It's a pinch of J.R. Ewing, a splash of Ted DiBiase, a spoonful of Stan Hansen, add an expensive suit and a couple of cronies, and you have a mega heel destined to be your top guy. Fans will never forget his incredible programs with Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, John Cena, and others. When it was all said and done, he was a European champion, a 17-time hardcore champion, a 3-time tag champ, a United States champ, intercontinental champ, and one of my favorite WWE champions of all time. All of that combined saw him inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2020. When he retired due to injury, he ended up becoming one of my favorite color commentators of all time. No hyperbole. I don't care what Meltzer's sheets had to say. He then started popping up on Fox News as a financial analyst, has done all kinds of charity work with kids, and more recently started a podcast with his longtime pal Gerald Brisco, where they invite other talent and share old stories. It is a must listen. Ladies and gentlemen, you know who's coming when you hear that bell. Better duck now. It's a clothesline from hell. His work's a masterpiece like a Norman Rockwell. He's a wrestling god, and you just smell. Give it up for John Layfield. This is JBL.
How you doing, Donnie?
Is that the longest intro you've ever had?
Maybe the best intro I've ever had.
Hey!
So thank you.
I like to get all the background stuff out of the way, you know, and now we can just chat. Now we can just talk. How are you, man? Thank you for making the time today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Through a mutual friend, Jimmy Corderas, who's a dear friend of mine.
Absolutely. I told Jimmy, I said, you're going to earn yourself an executive producer credit on everything I do at this point. I appreciate him connecting us because, as I said in the intro, this is not just a guy who's marking out or blowing a bunch of smoke. I've been a huge fan of yours since you first broke into the WWE. And I'm sure that with the interesting career trajectory you had, there were probably times early on or maybe partway through your career when you're working with Ron or whatever, that the concept of ever being the top guy in the company was not even in your head, right?
Yeah, of course. You know, a lot of people get overwhelmed by WWE, especially, I don't know, back then, maybe more so because you had the territories back then. So guys came from the territories, but once you get to WWE, you had 14, 15 TV trucks. It was a different level of professional wrestling. And a lot of people guys got overwhelmed by it. I certainly did. I remember watching Sean and Brett in that incredible Iron Man match in the pond, my first WrestleMania. I wasn't on the show, but I was backstage watching. And I remember just watching Sean when we were rappelled from the ceiling and had that incredible match. I remember thinking, I probably should go back to Japan. It was really overwhelming, and I didn't know, you think before you get there, because nearly anybody who gets there has, been a big fish in a small pond, some bigger ponds than others, but generally you've been a top guy most places you'd been. You think you're going to be one there, and then you get there and you realize this place is a different level, and that was my view of it as well.
Aside from the overwhelming production differences, what was it that really was a culture shock for you? Was it their work style? Was it communication policies? Like, what was it that really struck Justin Hawk Bradshaw as being like, whoa, I may not belong here?
I think it was everything. I was around some great talent. So when I was in Europe, Tony St. Clair and Fit Finley, they've had some of the greatest matches. I'd never seen a better match, maybe ever. The only thing I saw close was Taker and Sean. And those guys are just amazing guys. And so I got to watch those guys every single night, not always against each other, but against each, different talent. So I'd seen some great work, and I'd seen some great work in Japan. I'd seen some great work down in Texas, Mexico. Everywhere I'd been, I'd seen some really good work, but it was just everything in WWE was better. And I don't mean just the work. You're not going to get better than Finley or St. Clair. You may be equal or different. It's like they say, chocolate or vanilla ice cream. It's your choice of flavors. But that roster we had then was probably the greatest roster of all time. And because you had the NWO then with us, they're obviously in the different characters. You had Kane, who was a dentist. You had Triple H, who was an aristocrat. You had Stone Cold, who was a ringmaster. You had Brett, who was a champion at the time, on and off, and just at the top of his game. You had this incredible roster. We weren't drawing any money at the time. The Attitude Era took off, once Scott and Kevin went down to WCW and things kind of kicked off, and then Steve got hot. When Steve got hot, really everything changed. But that roster was so good from top to bottom. You had guys like Jack Lanza, who I thought was the greatest agent of all time. And the methodology for TV was it was so different. And it was just, when you look at it, you realize this is the big time. And there was no doubt about it.
When you look at that roster, 95, 96, I think you're bang on. I mean, the depth of talent, and you look at how many of those guys who at the time may have been working underneath went on to have Hall of Fame careers. It's like they were all knocking on the door of about to becoming the guy, right? They weren't quite there, but everybody was almost there. And then all of a sudden the floodgates opened, like you said. Stone Cold got hot. I think Brett leaving opened up spots. There was all sorts of change at that point with the same crew of guys, which is interesting. It wasn't like there was all kinds of new talent coming in. It was just elevating from within, which is good to see.
Yeah, and Brett leaving created Mr. McMahon, the character that was, that's what ended up, winning the war. I mean, at that time, the war was starting to shift. You had Tyson coming in, Steve was getting incredibly hot. But then when you added evil Mr. McMahon after the Montreal screw job with Brett, that changed everything. And unfortunately, WCW got a guy who was champion, not a champion anymore, and they didn't use him right away for whatever reason. There's been all kinds of reasons for whatever it was. But we came out of that with evil Mr. McMahon, and that was, to me, one of the greatest things that happened during the Attitude Era.
You made a comment about, seeing certain matches. You're like, oh, you're not going to find a better match than that. I'm curious to know, from your mind, what do you personally look at when you're trying to decide whether or not an individual is a great wrestler / worker, or the match is great? Is it literally just the technical elements of it? What is it that stands out to you as the criteria for that guy is fantastic?
It's nothing technical, and everybody's. Yeah. Some people want to look at the technical stuff, and that's all they look at. That's fine. That's what they love.
Sure.
When you're arguing about people's opinion, you can't win because I'm not right, and the person that's arguing against me is not right because it's your opinion. Right. My opinion, though, is what you do with the crowd. Killer Tim Brooks was a great heel. He was down in Texas. I rode with Killer a lot. He lived right near me. I'm down in Texas now. He lived right near me. James Beard would come by and pick me up. We'd go get Killer, and then we get Skandor Akbar, and we'd drive to the towns where we were going. So I rode a lot of miles with Killer. Killer was a guy. I remember it was one of the first times I'd ever met the term "smart mark." I don't think that's an appropriate term anymore. I'm not sure. I have no idea. I don't read much on the internet. I don't know what but that was a term that back then. And he said, "I can't stand Killer." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "His work rate's terrible." It's the first time I'd ever heard that. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "All he does is punch and kick. He's not any good." I said, "Let me ask you a question. Would you pay if they brought Stan Hansen in to face Killer Tim Brooks?" And the guy goes, "Oh my God, I'd pay double." I said, "You're right. He's not a good worker." Killer was a guy that would never have what you'd call a technical match, but he could get heat in an igloo. I mean, he was incredible heel when he sold tickets. I mean, he put over. Killer was just incredible. That to me is a wrestling match. When you're able to get emotional response out of people. And Killer always told me Killer was a very much a mentor to me. And he'd say whenever they take you out of your character and they don't like you, and like that guy when you talk about Killer, he would go, "I don't care about Killer the character. I don't like him. I don't like Tim Brooks. Would you pay to see him lose?" Oh my God, yeah. That to me is where you get really heat. And that's what Killer always would preach to me. So to me, it's what you do with the crowd, what emotions you leave them with. To me, Hogan versus Andre was a great match. And a lot of people say, "Oh, it was terrible. The Giant couldn't move, blah, blah, blah." Yeah, but how many people all these years later remember that moment of Hogan slamming the Giant? And to me, that's the key to something great is the memory. And did you leave them on their feet?
Yeah, I just had that conversation last week when I spoke with Al Snow, and Al said the best match at WrestleMania 3 was Hogan Andre, not Savage Steamboat.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. That building was sold out based off those two. And if you talk to anybody who talks about wrestling from back in the day, they will bring up Hogan slamming Andre. That was an important moment in wrestling history.
Yeah.
And to build up to that was so extraordinary. And to me, that was great work. And some people that will disagree with that and say it was terrible. That's okay. That's their opinion.
I think too, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm thinking that for you, and I'm only basing this because you and I don't know each other. So I'm only basing this on what I've seen of you in the ring. I'm thinking for you personally, one of the criteria that you appreciate when evaluating a match is how much it actually looks like a real fight. The believability factor, right? And like I've had this conversation with our friend Jimmy Corderas many times, and he likes to talk about guys who do the 450 spinning Phoenix splash. But you know what? A punch in the face, everyone knows what that's going to feel like.
Yeah.
Like I don't really process this flip thing and this split-legged moonsault and what that's going to do to my ribs. But I understand a punch in the mouth.
Yeah, and God bless these guys that can do that stuff. I think it's wonderful. I do. I really do. I mean, these guys are incredible athletes. And
Sure.
I love what they do. I couldn't do it, and I wouldn't want to do it because that wasn't the way I drew heat. It wasn't the way I built a match. I was calling a match for WWE several years ago, and it was somewhere on a military base or something. I can't remember where it was, and I don't remember all the people in the matches. But the matches before that weren't that good. And you could tell the crowd was not that into it. Randy Orton comes out, and he takes the guy in the corner, and he throws one punch. And when he does, the entire place, their attention was right there. And these guys had done all this crazy stuff. They'd done all this stuff. And I'm not taking away from the crazy stuff. I just maybe it wasn't done well. One punch, though, from Randy, and everybody paid attention. Now, it was Randy, but he wasn't like he is now.
Right.
He was a lot younger then. He wasn't quite as over as he is now. But that one punch, everybody just sat up, and I thought, that's work. That got people's attention.
You mentioned something earlier I want to rewind to, and you said, I believe you said Jack Lanza was the best agent you ever worked with.
Yeah.
What makes him stand out to you as a great agent?
Jack was a brilliant guy. I mean, absolutely brilliant guy. He had a great way about him. The boys and girls all respected him, which obviously helps. But Jack was just a brilliant guy. He didn't overproduce anything. He would tell you your time. Mm-hmm. He might tell you to try this. I remember one time he told me to try something. I came back, he goes, "Well, that didn't work, kid." and it didn't. But Jack had a great way about him. Why don't you try this? Why don't you maybe take that out? Put something else in. He wouldn't go over the whole match. He would just go over a few key spots, but he'd watch everything. He watched everything you would do, but he would just pick out a couple things because he didn't want to overwhelm you with, okay, here's what you need to change. You see that a lot, with producers that want to correct everything. Jack didn't do that. He just corrected a couple things here or there, and he would do it day by day. Jack was just a terrific agent and had a great way about him. The boys loved him.
Was he one of those guys that maybe, as you suggested, wouldn't do too much up front, but afterwards he had all kinds of feedback that was going to help you improve?
Yeah, and it was really up to the person. Jack would pull you aside if he thought you needed to point out something out, but he wouldn't point out 7 or 8 things. He'd point out 2 or 3 things. That was it.
Right.
Something for you to work on, the next night, because we were working every night. So it was different, back then, because we were, either building a match or building a repertoire, and Jack would work with you. He'd just give you a couple things to work on here or there.
I mean, there's also a certain amount of understanding how the human brain works. If you're giving someone 8 or 9 pieces of feedback after they've just done a 9-minute match, they're not going to retain 8 or 9 pieces of feedback. They might hear the one bit of constructive criticism and then say, well, they didn't like my match, so to hell with them.
Yeah, Jack wasn't a yeller or screamer. I never saw him raise his voice or anything. He didn't have to. He had a presence about him, but he wasn't a guy who would chew people out. He was a guy who would pull them aside and he would tell you what you did well. He had that great psychology about him. He'd tell you what you did well, then he would tell you some things that you might need to work on.
Everything that I've seen on your podcast indicates that you are loving this stage of your life. Do you have any interest in being an agent?
I don't think so. I don't know. And I've told Sami Zayn this, so it's not a secret. I wouldn't release it if it wasn't. I've said it before. I was Sami Zayn's agent one time, and after that, I quit. So,
what did he do?
I told Sami that. So I love Sami. I think Sami is one of the best characters I've ever seen. I love Sami. But he is, man. I was a guy who say, "How long do you need?" 12 minutes. Okay. What's the finish? Okay, that's it. That's all I needed. So to me, to deal with people that, but Savage was like that too. Savage was like that as well, just like Sami. And I remember I called a match in WrestleMania when there was no crowd, and Sami was in there with Daniel Bryan. And without the crowd, it sucked. It was tough. And Sami was screaming at one point. Every time Daniel kicked him, I thought, this is brilliant. It just made the match. He was crying at one point. He was screaming. I thought, what a great heel. So I love Sami, but I don't want to be his agent. It was a very short time, but that was my retirement ceremony.
Maybe if you take the job, you just have a no Sami clause.
That's right.
I think that's a great point that you just brought up, because I've had this conversation with people before off air. I think that no audience era during the pandemic really separated the top shelf workers from the guys who sometimes have some of their mistakes hidden. You know what I mean? Like when you come out there and there's no crowd to feed off of, man, you have to manufacture a lot.
Yeah, I don't know how those guys did it. I mean, I called a lot of the matches, and it was tough. I guess Al Michaels was one that called Miracle on Ice. He said, "Do you believe in miracles?" What he said next was nothing. He laid out for about a minute and a half and just let the crowd build, and respond to this incredible miracle on ice that had just happened that he called. You do that a lot in any sport, wrestling or anything. You let the crowd respond, but when that instinct is to not talk during that time, but you have to, because if you're not talking, there's no sound. So it was tough to call it. I can't imagine being out there having to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think wrestling announcers in general, not just WWE, but anywhere, you see this especially on independents, but anywhere, they seem to forget, like that beautiful Gordon Soley magic of sometimes you need a little quiet to allow the crowd to from the announcer, you need a little bit of a pause to allow the crowd to process what is happening, to hear the thud, or to, take it all in. I've been watching the Euro Cup of soccer, and it's like some of these announcers, they don't say a word for 30 seconds while the play develops. And it's like in North America, that's foreign to us. Like, we do not understand that. We just got to yap, and fill the airspace, right?
Yeah, and it's different with wrestling than it is with sports, because a lot of times in wrestling, in sports, you want to be a step ahead. So in sports, you want to be able to say that the cornerback has rolled up on the wide receiver, which frees up the MAC linebacker or the strong safety to blitz. That adds to the viewing experience of the fan. because now you look at, oh, yeah, see the cornerback's man, that frees up somebody in the middle to blitz if they want to blitz or if they want to do something different in the middle because of putting a guy on an island out here. In wrestling, you don't want to do that. Wrestling, you want to be a step behind. A lot of times you don't want to say, oh, his shoulder's hurt, because you're giving away maybe a finish by doing that. You want all of a sudden the fans to come to that realization. When you sit there and go, oh, who is that? You know who it is. It's The Undertaker. You've seen him for 52 straight weeks. But you want the fan to come to that realization first. So a lot of times you got to be a step behind in wrestling commentary than a step ahead like you do in sports. And I think that's why you don't see that many play-by-play guys that last for decades. Like a Michael Cole has lasted, Tony Schiavone has lasted, Jim Ross, Gorilla Monsoon. The number of play-by-play guys that have lasted decades is very small.
Topical. So I'll throw this out there to you just to see if you have a thought on it. But, Joe Tessitore just signed with WWE, and he's coming from the world of college football. He was the voice of Monday Night Football. Very well-respected play-by-play man.
Terrific play-by-play guy. A big fan of Joe. He's a terrific play-by-play guy, yeah.
Absolutely. But, people coming from the sports world to WWE haven't always fared well, as you kind of alluded to. How do you think his transition will go?
Most have not. Look, I don't know. Joe seems like a really bright guy. He does a wonderful job with football. He's very well researched. I think he'll do well, but you don't know until you get out there. Yeah. It's such a different dynamic, because you're not a real announcer calling a real sport. You're part of the show.
Right.
And that's important. That's important as how you call the match. You can't just say, I'm going to call this match. It depends who wins and loses. And depends on where you're going afterwards. You can say that this guy has zero chance. There's no way he'll ever beat this guy if that guy's going to win. Because what you've done is you put the underdog way down there and you give him a chance to come back. Now, if the guy doesn't mean anything to the roster, you can say that, but you don't want to do that to a regular person, regular person that's on the roster that's going to be there forever. So it matters where the storyline is going in wrestling. So it's not exact. It's more art than it is science. That being said, Joe's a smart guy. I have a feeling he'll do great. I have no idea. I hope he does.
The reason I enjoyed your color commentary so much is the same reason I enjoyed Taz. It's the same reason I enjoy Jerry Lawler. It's the same reason I enjoy Booker T. Because you're adding an entertainment factor to the straight guy that's doing the play-by-play. And I feel like there's this growing sect of internet wrestling fans that are just like, I just want them to call the moves. Don't tell stories. And I'm like, oh my God, you would hate baseball.
Oh, would you ever? Yeah. I watch baseball all the time, and it's they do a lot of things but call it a game, but you're out there for 3 hours with not a lot of action. So baseball announcers to me those guys are awesome.
Yeah, God bless them, right? But I feel like
I'll tell you an interesting story.
Yeah, please.
People are going to hate this, because where it came from, if they choose to. Vince McMahon, I remember one time I said something about a drop kick. Vince was in my ear and he goes, "It's not radio." And he goes, "I know it's a drop kick." He goes, "Explain to me who the person was that threw it, why he threw it, and why it's important." And that matters so much more to the fan, because if this person's throwing this beautiful drop kick and you go, "Oh, great drop kick," but instead you explain to me this person had worked under somebody that was famous for throwing drop kicks, worked under jumping Jim Brunzell, and he's learned this drop kick, and all of a sudden now he's doing this move and it's so fast. You explain who he is, and all of a sudden people relate to that character. If you're just calling the moves, to me, I agree with Vince. It should be radio.
A million years ago, I did a one-on-one interview with Gene Okerlund, and it still stands as one of my all-time favorites. And he talked about being in AWA and literally having Vern pull him off and say, "I need you to go do commentary tonight." And he's like, "I don't know anything about wrestling." Because he was just a legit broadcaster, right? And Vern's like, "Don't worry, just tell the people what you see." So in goes Gene Okerlund, and he said he was seeing moves that he didn't know. So he just started inventing names of moves. And one of the things he told me, and John, I don't know if he was ribbing me or what, because I've asked people before if this is legit. You're a historian. He tells me that he saw a guy do a hip toss, and he said, oh, there's a Beal throw invented by Gustavius Beal in the 1800s. He claims he just made that up on the spot, but people still call it a Beal throw to this day. Stories like that are crazy, right?
Absolutely crazy. I mean, I remember when Wade Barrett came out, Michael Cole created the bare knuckle fighting thing. Michael Cole created that, you know, and I looked it up. I'm a big fan of Bartley Gorman, who's the king of the gypsies. Is the name of his book. They say the greatest bare knuckle fight ever, you know, which is up for debate, obviously. But He threw the bull hammer, was what he threw, was this big punch. And, you know, Bartley was reportedly and apparently so undefeated as a bare knuckle fighter, never got beaten. And he always threw that bull hammer. So I gave Wade that name of the bull hammer in honor of Bartley Gorman and created this whole backstory that was total fiction. But Michael Cole and I did that. For one, we liked Wade, but two, we needed something to talk about. You know, and that helped make the character. Not that Wade couldn't have made it without that, but it certainly does help do that. You know, it was funny. I was talking to some guys from A&E about Hogan and Savage. And Savage was, you're jealous, you're this, you to put your hands on Miss Elizabeth. Hogan never defended himself. The only person that defended him was Gorilla Monsoon. So Gorilla had to tell the story. So that's when I talk about announcers are not necessarily like sports announcers. They're part of the story. You know, announcers can be very important in that way.
It's a great point. I mean, they are expected to move the story along, help get the talent over. And I think the story you just shared, I mean, you and Michael Cole helped get Wade Barrett over and helped get that finish over. And
I want to make sure Wade got Wade over. I don't want to take credit for Wade. Wade's a good guy. He's a smart guy, but we certainly helped create the story.
You played a part. It takes a village, right? And it's interesting. Wade's another guy, right? We're talking a lot about broadcasting here, and Wade's a guy who I've enjoyed his work on SmackDown. And now he's teasing a comeback. And now he's saying he wants to get back in the ring. He's medically cleared to do so. Do you think that's going to happen?
He's still young.
Yeah.
He was a good worker.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it probably will. And if I were him, do it. I mean, you got all your life to do commentary, and you don't have all your life to get into the ring. And if I'm him, if you still have that urge, just try it. You know, and if it doesn't work out, so what? Go back to commentary. If it does, you've got something, and then go back to commentary.
Is it hard for someone like you who at the end of your career, when you are JBL and you are the WWE champion and you're this monstrous personality, one of the top heels at that time, if not the top heel at that time, that's the image people have of you, right? When they close their eyes and think of JBL, that's who they're seeing. So did that lead to some difficulty when you were partnered with Baron? Because I feel like maybe people saw it like you were too big to be a second, not just physically, but also just, you know, the way people view you.
I don't know. I don't know what happened, and I don't know what the plan was. You know, they never told me. You know, they told me to come into Oklahoma that one time, and me cutting a promo in Oklahoma. You know, that's pretty easy. You know, being from Texas, so half my family's from Oklahoma. So I cut promos every day just for fun on Oklahoma. So, and they do on me in Texas. But so, and then after that, they said, "Well, next week." I go, well, "What's next week?" Then they started bringing me back. So I never really knew if it was a long-term plan or what was planned. You know, and it didn't work, and if it didn't, blame me. You know, I'm the veteran, and you know, Baron's a good, talented guy, very tough guy, very smart guy. I like Baron, but if it didn't work, blame me. I'm the one that obviously dropped the ball.
I just think that there's something to be said for someone who not just physically has very imposing stature, but has this aura about them that fans find it difficult to see them being a second. I mean, somehow Ric Flair transitioned into that role with Evolution, but
yeah, Arnie Scollin did. Who's a big guy. He did a great job. And I thought Arnie was a great manager. He didn't do anything except sit there with a towel on his shoulder. That's all he did. I thought it was great. It was awesome. You know, it's so different from everybody else. You know, you had the Grand Wizard back then you had Arnie, who was completely different. He just go out there with a towel over his shoulder. You knew this was a real tough guy. It just worked for Arnie. The problem I have with being a manager is my height.
Yeah,
the biggest problem. I'm 6'6", and with boots I'm about 6'7" or 6'8". So that's a tough thing. If you have someone that is 6 foot tall, I'm over a half foot taller than them. That's not what you want for a manager. You want somebody that makes them look bigger, not smaller. So, Colonel Parker had that problem. Colonel Parker was a big, tall guy, and he had a problem finding the right guy to manage because of his height. Hillbilly Jim was the same way. He had the Godwins who were massive men.
Yeah.
But that was about the only people that he really could manage because he was so big.
Yeah. The indie company that I work for here in Toronto, where I also coach, they've been saying to me for months, they're like, hey, so-and-so, we really like him, but he needs someone to talk for him. Can you go out with him? I'm like, guys, I'm 6'7". I'm going to make him look stupid.
Right. It's horrible, especially with me. I'm wearing boots, and it's just, it's just, and I'm still, 270, 280 pounds. So, not that I'm in shape, but I'm big.
Yeah.
It's just, the size differential is tough. I have a hard time. Baron is about the only guy that I could be out there with, that type of height, somebody like that.
Yeah, he's a big horse.